All economies and all governments face real limits relating to what can be produced and consumed. Any one country has a limited amount of real resources that they have access to in order to produce the things we like to buy. For example, there is a limit to the amount of labour, people, available to do work, a limit of raw materials like steel and timber, and a real limit to the number of factories and manufacturing facilities that turn raw materials into goods and services we want to purchase. So, labour, raw materials, and manufacturing facilities are the real limits to what can be produced and so consumed within an economy. If there is underutilisation of labour and resources in the economy, government can use its unlimited fiscal capacity, its ability to invest in the economy, to put these to productive use. It's only if we have full employment or full use of resources that any further spending by government could be inflationary and drive up prices. It's important to recognise that spending by anyone within the economy, government or business, carries an inflation risk under certain conditions. But these spending sources are not inevitable. The inflation risk depends on the real resources available to the economy: raw materials, capacity utilisation, and the unemployment rate. If we have an inflationary episode in today's modern money system, we have two choices in how to curb that inflation. We can use unemployment or a buffer stock of jobs. Historically, our government has made the choice to avoid inflation by ensuring unemployment and uses sanitised terms like the natural rate of unemployment to justify the hardship and social destruction caused by their choice. The government has an unfounded belief that there is an inherent trade-off between low unemployment and inflation, and that the economy therefore has a natural rate of unemployment below which inflation will take off. MMT condemns this approach of excluding people from the labour force to ward off potential inflation and offers a far superior solution of low unemployment and low inflation in a buffer stock of jobs called the Job Guarantee. MMT proponent Professor Bill Mitchell advocates that governments use the policy space provided them by monetary sovereignty to introduce a job guarantee in order to stabilise prices and pursue a return to unemployment rates of around 2%. These rates were achieved in Australia across the 60s and early 70s. The job guarantee is a fixed price buffer stock of publicly employed people. It would be federally funded and locally managed so that local communities can decide how best to deploy any idle labour. The job guarantee is an essential part of the MMT framework for stabilising the economy and avoiding inflation. By guaranteeing unemployed people a job, the federal government can put a floor on minimum wages and working conditions, generate full employment and price stability, stabilise the economy as the program naturally expands when the economy slows, and contracts as the economy speeds up. 3. The government's financial deficit is everyone else's financial surplus. So, what is a government deficit? In its most simple expression, the government is said to have run a deficit when spending exceeds taxes. Conversely, the government is said to have run a surplus when government taxes are greater than spending in a given year. That might seem familiar enough, so let's look at where government spending is going. It's going to what's called the non-government sector. This includes the private domestic sector, us folks here in Australia, and the external sector. Much of it goes into the private domestic sector, invested in things like Medicare, healthcare, education, defence, social welfare support, aged pensions, big infrastructure projects, and more. So when a government spends more into the economy than it takes out in taxes, the non-government sector has a surplus. When the government taxes more than it spends into the economy, the non-government sector has a deficit. Neither a government deficit or surplus is good or bad per se. The only way we can evaluate whether they are responsible and suitable is to consider the context of the economy at each point in time. For every saver who earns more than they spend, there must be somebody or some institution which spends more than it takes in. If we want the non-government sector as a whole to save, rather than go further into private debt, the government will probably have to spend more than it taxes, depending on what the rest of the world is doing. So, the government can't run out of dollars. That doesn't mean the government should spend like a drunken sailor or that we don't have to pay taxes, but it does mean balanced federal budgets aren't necessary. It also means government deficits can play a supportive role, allowing the private sector to build up its savings. Australia is a country with over 15% underutilisation of labour, over 30% youth underutilisation, fragile private balance sheets through excessive household debt, and has a growing need for green and other infrastructural investments. MMT shows that budget repair is a red herring. A government deficit or surplus is just the government's fiscal position in a given year, simply an account of what's happened. To think of it like a car or a bicycle that needs repair is just absurd. This means the government could and should be using its role as a currency issuer to promote full employment, social inclusion, support of our most vulnerable, ecological repair, and healthy private sector balance sheets. The important thing to remember is that the three insights MMT is based on aren't something that has to be adopted or implemented. They are simply facts of how our current monetary system functions. We just need a government who is willing to use the full potential of our currency to benefit our whole society. We hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you're interested in learning more about MMT and how it relates to you, click subscribe or leave a like or comment below.